Hello, good morning, and welcome to this session on carbon pricing in the ASEAN region, which is a session that is co-hosted by the Climate Policy Initiative and the LSE Center for Economic Transition Expertise. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning. It's much appreciated. It's Friday, it's early. There are lots of competing sessions, so we very much appreciate you and looking forward to also discussing with you later in the session. My name is Simon Dikau. I'm the Global Director of CETEx, which is a center at LSE that focuses specifically on providing central bank supervisors and finance ministries with technical assistance, capacity building, and targeted research. We will have two presenters first in the session who will introduce what carbon pricing is and why it is helpful, and also specifically what function carbon pricing can serve more broadly. And then we'll have a panel discussion with two very distinguished speakers here this morning. For the presentation first, I would like to introduce our two speakers. We have Albertus Siagian, who is a senior policy analyst at the Climate Policy Initiative based in Indonesia, in Jakarta. He's leading CPI's projects related to fiscal and broader financial policy. And before joining CPI, Albertus worked at the Boston Consulting Group. We're also very proud from LSE to say that Albertus is one of our alumni. He holds an MSc degree in environmental economics and climate change. Secondly, we will also hear from my CETEx colleague, Herlina Utamawati, who is a policy fellow with us at CETEx at LSE. Before joining CETEx a few months ago, Herlina worked for almost a decade at the tax department of the Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. So we also very much have an insider view here on taxes and tax policy. Herlina holds a master's degree in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School. With this, I would like to hand over to our two presenters for an introduction to carbon pricing in the ASEAN region.
Thank you very much, Simon. I will start the presentations. So the format of the presentations is me and Albert, we will present back to back. So since we will just do it more informally in here. Yes, the first one, we will talk about the climate finance gap in ASEAN. Because Southeast Asian countries face an urgent climate financing gap, especially to speed up clean energy transitions and climate adaptations. I would like to show you, this is the finding by the independent high-level expert group in the London School of Economics as a secretariat. There is a need for SDG and also climate finance. In 2030, it expected that will require around 2.4 trillion for emerging market outside China. And we can see here in the graph that the need is highest for the energy transitions for about 1.4 trillion. And despite energy transitions, we also need finance for adaptations and resilience, for coping with the loss and damage, and the natural capital and sustainable agriculture, and also just transitions. But I will also highlight that the investment need, it's based on the calculations in the 2022. If we don't act now, the need for the adaptations and resilience will increase over the years. And it will rise sharply as climate and nature risks escalate in the regions all over the world. And I would like to also show you the need of the advanced economy, China, and emerging market other than China. In the 2035, the need for the emerging market outside China is the highest. So as an Asian region, we need also to concern about this, to act now, and also to increase the investment in the energy transitions in other climate finance. Next, looking at the Southeast Asia regions, by mid-century, the energy demand is expected to overtake that of the EU. And also, in this left graph, I want to show you that in the emerging market outside China, the the purple one, it's showing the number for the 2022. In the middle one is 2030, and the right one is 2035. The need of investment in energy transitions for the 2030, it's 5 times than the needs in 2022, the current conditions. And in the 2035, it will be increased. We need to increase the investment in the energy transition 6 times. And also, according to the ASEAN's own report, that the need for both mitigations and also adaptations is as much as 422 billions by 2030. And Southeast Asians also already experience most disaster-prone regions, where in the 2010s alone, more than 2,900 disasters occurred. So this is also showing that we need to act now for the climate finance need, both for the energy transitions, also for the climate resilience. And we cannot avoid this anymore. Climate change is already affecting the regions. And this also shows the urgency of tackling this issue. For the next one, I will offer to my colleague here.
Next. Yeah, thank you, Herlina. As Herlina has mentioned, Southeast Asia is going to be a significant driver for global energy demand growth in the future. Hence, if we are to have a cleaner world in the future, and given that the energy sector is a significant emission driver, Southeast Asia should take part in the global energy transition too. So let us talk a bit about what an energy transition is. You can see from the slide, energy transition has several features. The first feature is moving from emission-intensive energy sources like coal, gas, and oil to energy sources that are less emission-intensive. I think you already know things like hydropower, geothermal, solar, wind, and others. The second feature is that we are having a decentralized off-grid power system, in addition to keeping the traditional centralized on-grid power system. The third feature is having more electrified energy, and not just non-electrified energy, but today we intentionally omit this feature for simplicity. Next. Yeah, next. Yeah. Okay, yeah, next. Oh, sorry. Coming back again. Come back again. Okay. Yeah. At the beginning of this presentation, we have laid out climate change as a reason for having an energy transition. It's true, but incomplete. There are more reasons for energy transition that are not related to climate change, and this is why we should consider energy transition more seriously than people usually think. Thanks to technological progress, renewable energy costs keep decreasing. Energy transition to such energy means giving this region a chance to be more cost competitive. Also, having a decentralized off-grid power system means that the electrification in Southeast Asia's remote areas can be made faster. Together with the energy cleanliness reason that people usually think about, these three reasons are the building blocks of solving the energy trilemma. Other reasons include better health outcomes due to cleaner air, opportunities for reducing fossil fuel imports for some countries, opening new economic sectors, and various interesting things. Next. Yeah, next. Okay, thank you. However, as things stand today, fossil energy is still dominating the system. So it is a huge task to make cleaner energy as the leader in the system. We need policies, and there are two sets of policies. The first set of policies is carbon pricing policies. Here we have carbon tax and carbon trade. Basically, their job is to put a price on carbon. Emitting every ton of carbon has a cost to pay now. The intended impact is to make the brown sector less profitable than the green sector and to make investors move their money out of their brown investment and reinvest such money into green investment. The second set of policies is non-carbon pricing policies. They set certain standards in certain industries. They shift subsidies from brown products to green products. They also mobilize money through issuing green bonds and channel the money to green projects, which are pulled in through green procurement and others. Those are just some examples. Basically, they are like an orchestra to direct where the market should go. But they need government to combine different policies and to understand in the first place the specific changes to be made in the market. Although both sets of policies are needed, today we will focus more on carbon pricing because it is arguably a more efficient mechanism to move the market because we believe it is changing the underlying behavioral structure in the market. Because carbon is now internalized into their price algorithm and because price is the core algorithm of the market. Next.
I will continue the sessions with what is the condition of the global carbon pricing instrument trend in the worldwide and in the ASEAN. This is the currently carbon pricing that implemented around the world. In the map, it shows that the jurisdictions that have implemented direct carbon pricing instruments, such as the compliance instruments, emission trading system ETS, and carbon taxes, and or domestic carbon crediting mechanism in 2025. This is maps by the World Bank, and it also shows that in 2025, there is around 113 instruments. For the ETS itself, it's around 37, and the carbon tax around 43. So how carbon taxes and carbon trade works, basically, I'm just also continuing what Albert mentioned earlier, that this is put price on carbon. For the carbon taxes, normally the tax carbon emission per unit of carbon dioxide or the carbon dioxide equivalent emitted by the industry or sectors. And for the carbon emission trading system, issue emissions allowance to covered firms or sectors with the allowance matching the emission of these entities needing to be surrendered at the end of the relevant period. For ASEAN itself, there are several countries that already implemented carbon pricing, such as Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand already implemented carbon pricing in the different scheme. In Indonesia, it's implement ETS, with currently considering implementing carbon taxes. In Singapore, it have carbon taxes, and also in Thailand already implemented carbon taxes earlier this year, but also considering to implement ETS. There's also other countries in the ASEAN that considering or planning to implement carbon pricing. For the Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Brunei is the current several countries that plan to implement carbon pricing. This shows that the issue of carbon pricing is more relevant and one of policy instruments that can be used, a policymaker in the ASEAN, to put price on carbon. Now, I will also discuss about how to design carbon tax. So, I will highlight that for the carbon tax, there is an importance to build the narrative to make the carbon tax more acceptable. Why is that? Because when we talk about tax, no one wants to be taxed, including if it's for a good, even for a good reason, because carbon tax is taxing discouraging high emitting behavior, and we want to make the polluters pay. But in a way, there will be always resistance when we talk about tax anywhere in the world. And so why people don't want to be taxes? This is one of research that also done by the Grantham Research Institute in the LSE. There is several reasons that we identify. First one is considering the burden of the tax to be too high, both personally and to the wider economy. Because if we put price to the carbon, it will be also impacted of the other supply chains, especially in the energy prices. And then also there is a concern about the regressive of the nature, such as the disproportionate of the negative impact on the low-income household. Because if we increase the price for the energy, the one that will be impacted the most, the vulnerable, will be the lower-income households. We'll come to the next when we talk about how to design this carbon tax. There is the importance to redistributions of the taxes. And the third one is the disbelief that the carbon taxes will be effective in the reducing greenhouse gases. Because when we put the price on carbon, it's not directly linked to the carbon emitted to the atmosphere, and also the reducing of the carbon. So there will be maybe a worriness of this firm paying tax to the government, but what is the impact to the environment? And the last one, this is also really important for the governance, is the distrust to the government. There will be also hinder for policymakers to implement carbon tax. From all of that reasons that we identify, so we also want to designing the carbon tax that will at least cover some of the concern. The first one will be the phase-in carbon taxes over the time. And this has already been done in the Singapore, because they already made regulations and to put the carbon taxes, the price of the carbon taxes increase over times. And then the second one, it will be also good to earmark the carbon tax revenue to finance additional climate change mitigation needed, as we see also in the beginning of the presentations that the needs is quite high, both for the energy transitions and also for the mitigations. This is also the third one will be important to redistribute the taxes to achieve fairness and revenue neutrality. What it means to the revenue neutrality, it is that the revenue that received by the government, it will be allocated to also the household that impacted. And also the last one, the government that considering to implement a carbon tax need to communicate their proposal carefully to the public to address the voters' concerns, especially this is for the political reasons, because nobody wants to be taxed. So this is the importance of the communications that I will also highlight in the next presentations. Carbon tax needs a smart communication strategy. This is 5 things that we identify that could be implemented by governments if want to considering carbon tax as a policy instrument. The first one, it's the expected greenhouse gas reductions arising from the tax. If the government can communicate that by implementing this policy, it could reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it will be also convincing the public to be taxed, and also other that's not be taxed but impacted by the rising of the prices, because they also contribute to the environment. And also the second one, the expected co-benefits such as the reduced tariff congestions or the air pollutions, health costs, because they will be impacted everyone, not only the one who will pay the taxes. And the third one is the expected variation in costs for goods most likely to be affected by the tax. It shows that government already considering when implemented these taxes, it's also considering what is the overall impact to the wider economy. And the fourth one is the impact on the average household income and on the economy, including potential competitiveness effect and job losses, especially if such country in ASEAN, one country implemented carbon tax, in other country maybe not implemented carbon pricing. It will also impact trade within country and also cross-border countries. So that will be also a consideration that government need to design before implementing carbon tax. And the last one is the impacts on the low-income household, such as by giving a subsidy or in cash, in kind to the low-income household that impacted. There will be another policy instrument that could be implemented by the government when deciding to implement carbon tax. I hope I didn't take too long times. This is one more presentations about the carbon trading for ASEAN. I will also show the challenges and opportunity for the carbon trading. This is a different instrument rather than carbon prices, but also to put in the ASEAN regions. This is introduced in the high income jurisdictions in the 1990s and 20s, starting from the development of the EU-UK emission trading system. But emerging market also start to exploring this initiative. It shows by the China with its regional ETS and also Kazakhstan in the 2020. So it might be started in the developed countries, but it's also a policy instrument that can be implemented in the emerging market, especially ASEAN. And especially right now. I will show also why the opportunity to be implemented right now. Because in emerging market especially, economic policy and climate policy are deeply interconnected. We can say that for ASEAN, we might be focused on the economic growth, but in a way to make a strategy for sustainable growth, we need also to think about the climate policy, because we not only think about now, we also need to think about the future. So the carbon trading design is essential to address both economic challenges and opportunity. For the challenges, I think this is also resonate with the ASEAN countries. That might be industrial resistance. Both, if we want to implement carbon tax or carbon trading, the industry is the first one that they need to pay, so that it must be the one things that we need to address. They don't want to pay more because of they have a concern, the fears of the economic impact, the fears of they need to reduce their operations, job losses, reduce its profitability is the main concern. And also, the second one is the vulnerable household that will be impacted by the increase of the price. And we can also, we need to also address that there is a complexity in the implementation of the carbon trading. So there will be administrative challenge, especially in ASEAN, when we have limited resource, limited knowledge about the carbon trading. So we need to build and trusted exchange institutions in a way that government resource and capacity is enough or also can address this. But there is an opportunity if we implement this. The first one is the revenue recycling. There will be additional revenue from for the government to address the climate finance. And the second one, I also want to highlight this, the international synergy is the regional carbon market or carbon pricing coalitions. ASEAN as a regional cooperations have a potential to build the carbon trading scheme either within country or between region. As we see that in the EU, it will also implement it in the regional area. So that might be also potential for ASEAN to synergize or harmonize the carbon trading system. And in the current development also, there is a carbon pricing coalitions that the discussion is already been held for the emerging market because of the impact of the next one. I also mentioned about the EU-UK Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism or CBAM. With the implementation of the CBAM, for the firm or industry that want to export their product to the EU or UK, they need to pay. They need to pay for the carbon that they emitted to the CBAM. But in a way, if we already implement it in our countries or in the regions, the money that we pay is still within these regions and also will be used to address the climate finance gaps needs by its regions itself. So I see this as an opportunity to implement carbon trading now than ever, because this EU-UK CBAM is also already implemented this year and also next year's. And the last one is the recycling of the carbon pricing revenue. In this way, it will also require the new governance structure and the relaxations of fiscal constraint of the use of the tax revenue for redistributions and enhancing government capacity to build a trusted exchange institutions. This is to address the administrative challenge that faced by the government, especially in the ASEAN regions. I will give this last one to the Albert. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Next. So this is a summary of our presentation. Let us start with the carbon trade. The downside is that it requires an exchange institution as the marketplace, and such institution might be complex to build. Hence, carbon trading may be applicable only in certain sectors. But this also brings us to the upside. Its limited applicability may lead to smaller economic impact and thus smaller political resistance. Basically, carbon trading means letting the market determines the carbon price and seems pro-market. About the carbon tax, the upside is that if the carbon tax is seen as just another variant of tax, then because governments are already well versed in taxing people, this should be easier to implement. But then it means this might be applicable to a wider range of economic sectors and may create a deeper economic impact. As a result, carbon tax can be politically more challenging because basically you let your government, not your market, decide how much price to put on carbon. Next. Next. Okay, so I think this presentation has been a good prelude to a panel discussion. I would like to hand over to Dr. Simon Dikau, who will be the moderator of this panel discussion. And just FYI, after this panel discussion, there will be a Q&A time where the audience can give questions to all of us on the stage, the panelists, the moderator, and the presenters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Albertus and Herlina, for this great presentation. I think we got a good overview over what carbon pricing is and how it can be implemented, especially differentiating between the role of the government here and the role of a carbon tax and the market mechanism that can be used within emissions trading scheme. But the fundamental issue is, of course, we need initiatives that put an explicit price on carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. And I think you also outlined very nicely why that is the case. And I'm looking forward to also discussing this with the panel. So it captures essentially the external costs and ties them to the source via a price. And that is from an economist point of view a very attractive first best solution. In terms of my background, I've worked more on second best solutions and trying to find other financial policy instruments, the role of central banks, role of monetary prudential policy. But this is of course the most beautiful first best solution, and this is something we will discuss. In this context, I would like to introduce our two very distinguished panelists. First, we have with us Dr. Ambiyah Abdullah, who's a senior researcher at the ASEAN Center for Energy and is in the Energy Modeling and Policy Planning Department of ACE. She's an expert in macroeconomic modeling and climate policy more broadly and holds a PhD degree in environmental economics from Nagoya University. Very importantly, Dr. Ambiyah also launched two reports at this forum here 2 days ago. The first one is the ASEAN Capacity Building Roadmap on Energy Investment, and then the ASEAN Energy Investment Report. Secondly, we have with us Professor Sayuri Shirai, who's a professor of economics at Keio University and an advisor on sustainable policies at the ASEAN Development Bank Institute in Tokyo. Her research focuses broadly on financial climate policies, but also specifically on carbon pricing and the broader supportive policies in this scheme. Professor Sayuri is also a former central banker who served at the Bank of Japan's Monetary Policy Board, and therefore also has a very special perspective on carbon pricing. Because in my experience, there's a lot of emphasis, especially in the central banking space, on maybe other parts of the government solving this problem first before central banks step in. So with this, I would like to turn to Professor Sayuri, actually, for the first question that we also have up here on the screen. There is, of course, a lot of emerging experience around carbon pricing, carbon taxes, some positive, some negative implementation problems, but also opportunities. So I would like to ask you about Singapore's experience with implementing a carbon tax as the first country in the ASEAN region to do so, and whether there are any lessons that you have observed.
So Singapore introduced very clear sort of carbon tax, and they show very clear path in terms of the carbon tax. So over time, they are increasing it. So why Singapore is introducing carbon tax rather than ETS, emission trading system, which are adopted by China, Indonesia, and Korea, and etc. The reason is clear, because Indonesia, they don't have a lot of emission-intensive manufacturing and electricity sectors. We need certain scale of industry, emission-intensive industry, in order to promote this emission allowances transactions. So because Singapore is so small and most of the goods and services that they are importing, right, even electricity, so that's why they decided to introduce carbon tax. Now, technically, I think carbon tax is better than emission trading. Because if you look at EU is the first region to introduce emission trading system. But at some point, their price, carbon tax, emission allowance trading cost reached about $100. But now only 70, because the European economy is not doing well. So there's a lot of volatility in terms of carbon pricing. If we introduce market system, then it's not very clear-cut signal to the emission-intensive sectors. But if we have a tax over time, Singapore tried to increase it. So it's a very clear message that emission-intensive industry have to do something to reduce emissions. So that is one issue, I think, problem with regards to market system. But I think we can discuss next, but it's not appealing to the public.
Yeah, thank you so much. And very interesting, of course, to think about in a also ASEAN-wide system and pricing system. Who would be the buyers and who would be the suppliers of carbon credits? Who's emitting? Who's reducing? Who needs additional credits? Who can sell credits? And maybe I jump a little bit ahead here to Dr. Ambiyah with the question. Well, yes, who might be the suppliers of carbon credits in a hypothetical ASEAN-wide carbon market?
Okay, it's difficult question actually, yes. But my name is Ambiyah Abdullah, so I'm representing the ASEAN Center of Energy. If we look on the ASEAN current ongoing policy discussion, especially related to the carbon market and also energy sector, I think it's really good timing for us to strengthen the carbon pricing mechanism in ASEAN, particularly in energy sector. So in 2023, I think the ASEAN already officially announced the ASEAN carbon neutrality target and ASEAN carbon neutrality strategy target. If we look on that strategy, more than 75% of the GHG emission of the ASEAN come from energy, from the power, industry, and transport. And then we will, on energy sector especially, we try to enhance the regional cooperation and also accelerating the energy transition. Why we choose these two hot topics? Because we realize that energy security is one of the key issues that the region need to maintain. And the second one, energy transition related to the carbon market, is also important because we don't want to see the ASEAN key sector like power, industry, and also the transport still producing the GHG emission, which may impact the future of the ASEAN energy sector. But if we look on the structure, on the current landscape of the carbon market, or we can say like a policy on the carbon pricing in ASEAN, as mentioned by colleague from CPI and also from LSE, that's not all the ASEAN country already have the carbon pricing mechanism. So if we look on the policy document, both on NDC and also on the related key policy document on energy sector, most of the ASEAN country already introducing the concept of or regulation on carbon pricing policy, except maybe in Brunei Darussalam. Brunei Darussalam still on discussion, and they are still in getting the official approval. But if we look on the, I mean, on the mechanism, not all the ASEAN country, but Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, Singapore. Singapore is one of the outlier in this topic discussion. So then, however, if we look on the discussion in other term and the regional level, in 2024, we already also launched the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework that was led by Malaysia and Thailand and Indonesia and also Singapore. In this context, I think looking on the current progress of these 4 countries in the leading of the carbon pricing, the supplier maybe will be this 4 country. I mean, because they already started earlier than the other ASEAN member country. Although we cannot compare with the like AU and also Japan, China, and also other already advanced carbon market mechanism. Yeah, maybe yeah.
So I don't think each country have to pick one. If you look at Europe, EU, they both apply emission trading system and carbon tax. So in the case of EU, as a region, they have this emission trading system. So they pick very emission-intensive sector, like chemical and electricity, etc., and they set aggregate emission permitted. And over time, they try to reduce it, and they allocate these allowances to these targeted sectors. Now, then each European countries, they have additional carbon tax, which are not overlapping with exchange emission trading system, and then they apply their own country-specific carbon tax to certain industry. So actually, you see both. In the case of Japan, we have carbon tax, but only $2, very low. Okay, and it's so unpopular among public. So that's why from next year, the Japanese government is going to, introduce emission trading system. Yeah.
Very interesting to also, of course, consider the political realities of a carbon tax and the implications. And in the presentation, we heard a little bit about also the arguments for a carbon tax as a potential source of revenue to also fuel and finance green growth in the broader sense. But yes, there is of course a massive communications issue also. Carbon taxes are not necessarily popular as we've seen in Canada very recently. Considering all of this, maybe a follow-up question for Professor Sayuri. In which ASEAN countries do you think we are getting close to very concrete next steps on carbon pricing or even a carbon tax?
So I look at the various ASEAN countries, and I work closely with a financial regulator in the region. I think, to be honest, Singapore is really taking the lead. I think it's partly because they are importing a lot of goods and services. They're very different from Indonesia, where they have mining and a big industry, right? So, to take the reality, Singapore is very clear. But at the same time, Singapore import a lot of goods and emission-intensive goods and services. So that's why they have to collaborate with ASEAN countries. I think overall in Asia, we are all trying to introduce some kind of carbon pricing, but the price is so low. For example, if you look at China, only $10. Korea, like $7. So, even we introduce carbon pricing, but the prices are not very high because it's public still do not really understand why we need to reduce emission, why we have to do it by charging higher prices. Public is still not convinced.
Yeah. Maybe another point to pick up from the presentation is, of course, also the external pressure to create a carbon price and through an ETS or a carbon tax, namely through the European Union's CBAM, which is, of course, implemented to ensure that goods that enter the EU are correctly priced in terms of carbon. This, of course, has massive implications for producing countries, for exporting countries, and can also, well, is also definitely debated in terms of whether this is implementable. But more importantly, in terms of the economic growth implications also for countries that are heavily exporting to the EU. And maybe with this, I can also turn back to Dr. Ambiyah with the question of how will an ASEAN-wide carbon market or carbon price affect the regional economic disparities?
Okay, so if we look on ASEAN member states, we are now have, I think, become 11 with Timor-Leste. And then if we look on the economic characteristic and also the status of the other important indicator, indeed we have a diverse market condition. And if we try to implement like ASEAN wide carbon market across the region, there is a potential that will increase the regional economic disparity. There is a risk, but there is also opportunity, as mentioned, that if the government of the ASEAN member state carefully design and the manage how the ASEAN carbon market implementation, it may also increase the economic performance of the ASEAN member state. A very good example, you may heard a lot of things or discussion going on in the first and second day of this year ASEAN Energy Business Forum is related to the APG. Yeah. So I think in terms of the APG, why we would like to promote the ASEAN power grid interconnection, because we would like to strengthen the regional cooperation, and also we also would like to ensure the energy security. But we also aware that having implemented the ASEAN power grid interconnection is not easy task. First, as we have diverse market condition in ASEAN. And the second one, in terms of the technical, we also need to think how to harmonize these technical things of the power system and also electricity system and electricity price. For example, if it is related with the carbon market. I mean, the same story will happen with the carbon market. That's why the ASEAN member state need to carefully design how this ASEAN carbon market will bring more on economic benefit rather than increase our economic disparity in the region. And we will start with enhancing the ASEAN power grid interconnection in the region as one of the lesson learned for this upcoming ASEAN carbon market. And I would like to add one, as I mentioned, we announced ASEAN Common Carbon Framework. And then I think it's a very good step for the region because it's officially launched, and it also linked with the previously regional policy launch on the ASEAN sustainable taxonomy. And in 2023, I think we also already launched the ASEAN guidance on energy transition. And we also have one key document on this, on ASEAN energy transition finance. Yeah. So I see a lot of good progress that the ASEAN member states as a region, we make a good sign for the external collaborator or in the market. However, if we look on the challenge on the region, we have, as mentioned in terms of the investment, we have a huge investment gap. And one of the reasons why we have this investment gap, there are two main reasons. One is technical capacity, and it's applied not only on the investment but also apply on carbon market technical capacity. Not all the ASEAN member states have the same capacity to understand how to implement the carbon pricing mechanism, how to design of the carbon mechanism. That's why we see this improving the capacity building will help when we want to design the ASEAN carbon market with the focus minimizing the risk to increase the regional economic disparity. And the second one, currently there is a need to strengthen the cross-sectoral linkage on the climate and energy, because up to now climate sector and energy sector are not interlinked each other. It also happened on the energy sector and finance sector. We found that there is maybe there's a kind of room to improve the same understanding between the stakeholder in energy sector and also in climate sector and also in the financial sector. So it's also referred to this long-term goal that we would like to have the ASEAN carbon market with bringing more benefit to the region rather than increase the economic disparity.
Professor Sayuri, please.
I think we are talking two issues which shouldn't be confused. So one is we are talking about carbon tax and emission trading system. That is a discussion about which one is more effective in terms of reducing your economy's total GHG emissions. The other one we are talking about is market trading, okay? That is two issues here. When we are talking about trading carbon credit, there are two issues. One is what I just talked about, emission trading system. So government or regulator allocate permission, allowances to permit, to emit to the emission-intensive sectors, and then people who did not use all these permitted emissions can sell those allowances to somebody else. So that is one trading, okay? Sort of ETS-related trading. There's another carbon market. That is called voluntary carbon market. Somebody else, maybe Indonesia, somebody tries to reforest, create reforestation. And then from reforestation, they can increase the ability for forest to absorb carbon dioxide. Then we can create carbon credit, right? This is somebody else, third party's emission reduction effort. That carbon credit are traded voluntarily in the market. So when we talk about carbon market, we are talking two things. One is transacting allowances. Another one is voluntary carbon market. We had a conference this March in Tokyo, inviting a lot of ASEAN countries. And in terms of this voluntary carbon market, I see Malaysia is taking lead, in addition to Singapore. Malaysia, Bursa, they are stock exchange. And then what they do is these are voluntary carbon credit created by somebody else, and then certified under certain system. So it's a carbon credit. And it's now increasingly popular among ASEAN countries. The stock exchange, sort of under government initiative, try to certify which this voluntary carbon credit meet certain target. So not all the voluntary carbon credit are permitted under certain conditions. For example, Bursa, they use internationally accepted beta and the gold standard approach. And then they, if those are produced, they can be transacted on Bursa stock exchange. Indonesia also started to do it recently. So these are, so Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia are taking lead in terms of developing this carbon credit, especially private sector voluntary base, and the stock exchange is taking the initiative.
Thank you so much. I think it's very important to recognize the complexities of the different pricing mechanisms here and how you can combine them and how you also find a politically feasible solution given the dynamics within any country. I'm therefore also very interested in maybe your views on where carbon taxes, as one specific example, have failed or have been removed again. And the Canadian example is of course a very interesting one, with Mark Carney having championed to some degree the climate discussion in at least the central banking and therefore also a little bit the financial space. Starting in 2015 with his speech on the tragedy of the horizon. So very interested in your thoughts on also what can we learn from where it has not worked so well. Maybe first Professor Sayuri, please.
So technically, carbon tax is clear and much easier to implement, right? Because government just charge extra tax on the industry or some production level where emissions are generated. So it's much easier. It's just a general tax, like exercise tax, right? But the difference is carbon tax is in proportion of carbon dioxide, right? So one same tax rate, but if I emit a lot of carbon emissions, then I have to pay more tax. So it's very simple. Now, why ETS is very popular? Because ETS gives some room for the industry. Because if I'm an emission-intensive electricity companies, I was given allowances from the government, so I can emit only up to this amount. If I really make effort in generating renewable energy, I do not need to use this, allowances, so I can sell and make money to somebody else, right? And if I emit more than that, I can buy from others. So there is some room for the industry, to adjust. But the tax is not avoidable. It's very clear cut. Therefore, it's more effective. But the industry does not like it. And also, it's immediately charge higher prices to utility. So public does not want it right now, especially when inflation is very high.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think that's a very important point to recognize that maybe the easiest solution here is not necessarily the one that is most effective also in terms of just acceptability within a country. However, for a more complex solution, you of course also need more advanced institutions that are able to implement and to set up, for example, an ETS. Dr. Ambiyah, very interested also in your thoughts on the challenges in this context with regard to implementing a rather easy tax versus creating a rather complex ETS.
Thank you. I agree with Professor Sayuri. Carbon tax is easy target, but maybe challenge if we would like to introduce, like mentioned by us, because if you look the ASEAN region, we have different market structure. And when the industry hear about the tax is, negative, yeah. They feel like additional burden. And if the government of the ASEAN member state also would like to choose the carbon tax, we need to carefully design that the impact will not on the lower income household in the region. And in another one is emission trading system. Some of the ASEAN member states already choose, like Indonesia and also other, like Thailand as well, because of a consideration of the room, or that's Professor Sayuri mentioned, when the government introduced the ETS, it gives some room for the industry to find a way to meet the allowance target with their own solution, for example. And we also have one mechanism related to this to support a renewable energy certificate in the region. So this renewable energy certificate in the concept is similar like ETS, because we give some room for the industry player who have the install renewable energy, that they can trade the renewable energy certificate to give some allowance. In just it's kind of the similar like ETS, yeah. So ETS is more easier for the government because it kind of give room for the industry player to design. But carbon tax, maybe Singapore, because the market structure of the Singapore is compared to other ASEAN member states already more advanced, and also mentioned by Professor Sayuri, Singapore imported a lot of energy from other ASEAN member states, so it's easier for them to put the tax and get the revenue, and then but in the long term, I think the member state also need to see in the current moment, like most of the member states seem choose ETS over the carbon tax, but probably in the next coming years they will have a look, examine the progress of this current mechanism, and there is potential also when the market and industry already ready, the ecosystem already there, then maybe carbon tax can be started to introduce.
No, thank you so much. I would like to open it also up to the audience for a few questions in a few minutes. But I have one final question for all of our 4 speakers here. Regarding the last question, so should we choose a carbon tax or a carbon trade or both? I think we heard compelling arguments that maybe a combination of both is necessary, and there need a lot of considerations need to be taken into account with regard to political realities, incentives for companies to reduce emissions, and also revenue for government investment in green growth strategies and projects. But maybe Albertus, if I could first turn to you with a question that I have for all our speakers. What is the next step from your point of view in the ASEAN region when we think about carbon tax, carbon trade? What comes next? What is the next step?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think this question is really hard to answer. I think it really depends on the institutional readiness of each country. So, for example, for small countries, maybe, I don't know, this is just my opinion, maybe for small countries it will be easier to implement carbon tax first rather than carbon trade. But maybe large countries like Indonesia or Malaysia or Thailand, it will be easy for them to do carbon market first. It also depends not only on the institutional readiness or the population size, but also we have to look at the development level of the country. I think that's also one thing that we need to consider. Because, for example, if we implement carbon tax, maybe the impact for the economy can be larger. So maybe we really have to see the readiness of the people. Meanwhile, for the carbon trade, if the countries already have robust exchange institutions, maybe it will be easier for them to implement carbon trade. But again, just to resonate what the panelists have said, it is not that we have to choose one. Maybe it is just about the sequence. Maybe, for example, carbon tax first and then carbon trade, or carbon trade then and then carbon trade and then tax. And also we can start from small scale and then we can upscale that later in the future. So it really depends on the process, I guess. Yeah.
So much, Herlina, very interested in your thoughts.
Thank you. So for me, I will also add that to implement either carbon tax or carbon trading, each country could think about 3 areas. The first one is what is the economic benefit to implement each of the instrument, and is it administratively feasible to be implemented? And the third one, it's also like, is it politically supportable? So this is like 3 dimensions of a policy instrument that can be implemented to country. So I also want to echo both of the panelists and also Albert's statement that whichever instrument that country choose, it's important to convince the public that carbon pricing, that there is a emitting carbon to the atmosphere is not a good thing, and you should reduce to emit carbon. So I think whichever that we implement, we should implement now. It also depends on the country's need, but ASEAN countries should act now for implementing carbon pricing? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's good discussion. I think under the ASEAN common carbon framework, the region already announced 3 phases to have this carbon market. Phase 1 is to build the ecosystem of the carbon market. Means is include like two speaker mentioned institutional readiness of the region. I mean each ASEAN member state, and also second the technical capacity knowledge of the ASEAN member state in how to design the ASEAN carbon market. Either they will choose carbon tax or carbon trade in the region. So maybe I would like to add the one thing, the next step for the ASEAN to choose, I mean, carbon trade or carbon, is having technical capacity for the ASEAN member state on the carbon market. I think this one is limited because not all the ASEAN member states have the same capacity, technical capacity to design of the carbon one, including like mentioned by Ms. Herlina, when we choose carbon tax or carbon trade, we need to think about what will be the economic benefit, what will be the key sector, and what will be the political acceptance. That's one, I think not all the ASEAN member states have the capacity how to design this one. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yes, Professor. Please.
Yes. So about carbon tax, you know, before we talk about carbon tax, let's look at each country's tax system. For example, in the case of Japan, we have like oil and gas exercise tax. And then you may have some taxes related to consumption of oil and gas. Converting that into carbon tax is most important before we start to introduce completely new one. Just converting existing taxes related to oil production or consumption into the carbon tax, which is proportional to carbon dioxide generated. So I think that is a starting point. And I think a lot of Asian countries will try to introduce ETS, but regionally, I think we need to agree on, you know, the path, carbon price path. Because one country have very high, you know, prices, another country so low. Then, you know, company will try to move to, you know, to the countries with low prices. So we have to discuss internally. Finally, we really need to develop voluntary carbon market, private sector initiative. How to improve the quality is important. China is doing a lot, and Japan also have its own initiative. ASEAN is trying to do it, but still individual features. So we need to have a basic foundation. What is the high quality voluntary carbon credit? And so I think we started to discuss, but we need to discuss a bit more in Asia.
Thank you so much. Yeah, very interesting to see a lot of agreement here on the panel, but to also, yeah, of course, hear the emphasis on the regional differences and the importance to take this into account. That if a region as diverse as the ASEAN region is trying to come up with a carbon pricing approach, that it's fundamental to take into account these huge differences in terms of who's producing, who's emitting the most, what are the different institutional settings, and what is actually political feasible in terms of implementation. Yes, with this, I would like to open it up and to see if there are any questions in the audience on broadly on carbon pricing and tax or on ETS for any of our four speakers, of course. Yes, please, here. Is there a microphone? If you also quickly want to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Hi, I'm Aliyah. So my question is for Dr. Ambiyah and anybody else who might also want to take this on. But I'm very interested in the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework. So many ASEAN carbon projects have been said to fail to attract international buyers because of methodological or certification gaps. I'm wondering, in your opinion, what reforms could ensure ASEAN carbon credits to meet these global quality benchmarks while still while still remaining accessible to local project developers as well? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who would, yes, please?
So about carbon credit, right? So what do they do? For example, in the case of Bursa, Malaysia and Singapore, they try to first introduce standard already used internationally, such as BERA and gold standard. That is good starting point. However, in Indonesia and some Asian country, they have some energy industry, and those standards are not prepared by this international organization. So Asian-specific issue. So that's why Indonesia and probably Malaysia, they have to develop their own methodology. Then here comes the discussion. And you have to make sure those standards are not like leading to some greenwashing, protection of emission-intensive industry. So how to promote the standard methodology, which convince global investor and company is most important. After all, who buy carbon credit? Actually, multinational company like Japanese company, and then because they're also emitting, a lot of emissions from chemistry, etc. So they need to buy from carbon credit. A lot of them are created in Indonesia and ASEAN. So internationally accepted standard is very important.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yeah, I agree. Because if we look on the international standard, as Professor Sayuri mentioned, usually to refer like either FERA or gold standard. And in case of the ASEAN member state, if we look on each other's ASEAN member state, for example, in Indonesia, we have a national registry standard system. National registry standard system somehow has discrepancy with the international standard. That one of the reason why you mentioned why it failed to attract the international buyers, because different discrepancy of the standard. The issue of the discrepancy of the standard when we look on the carbon credit, it is not something new. It's not something that unrecognizable by the government of the ASEAN member states. That's in the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework. It's already included in the phase 1 when we try to build the regional ecosystem for the carbon credit. It's emphasized the importance of having evaluation of the current existing available standard applied in each ASEAN member state, and we need to see how different this existing standard in the ASEAN member state with the international recognized standard. And the phase 2 will enhance this, will try to harmonize between the existing national standard with the international one to enable any carbon credit can be sold in the international market. And the third one, this is more on the long term, on the phase 3, because having the same standard with the international one, it will easier for us to sell our carbon credit and participate. In addition, it also will enable ASEAN member state to participate in the like Article 6.2 when we look on the Paris Agreement, that we have huge potential for our carbon emission reduction action to be solved and to bring the additional revenue for us to finance climate mitigation and adaptation in the region. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we have a question over there, please.
Hi, good morning. So thank you for the panelists. Is a good discussion anyway. So just got a couple of questions that I really wanted to explore. And the first one is with regards to the regional coordination angle. Given that there is a wide difference between the carbon price and readiness across ASEAN, right? And in fact, only like 3 or 4 countries which are ready, yeah? And only 2 countries which are One country is already being implemented, and another one will be implemented next year. So, how can, given that you suggested for a common pricing framework, how can the region design those carbon pricing framework that allows for the flexibility, especially for the less developed members, while still moving forwards to a common market or some price signal or something like that, right? That's question number one. And question number two is that given, like I say, given the ASEAN diverse economies, the question is that should we, as ASEAN country or as ASEAN region, focus on harmonizing the carbon pricing through the common framework, or can we allow countries, say Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, or maybe Philippines, maybe, to develop their own system first, right? Make sure that the system is mature, and then we link up together. And when to link up, that's one question that maybe I can ask the panelists to give some answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great questions. Maybe first on the regional coordination question and how to build a common framework. Very interested in views from the panelists. Not sure who wants to start. Yes, Herlina, any views from you? Yes, Professor, please.
So it's very important to have a harmonization in terms of carbon pricing. But at the same time, some countries really take a lot of initiative. Let me give you an example. So, for example, in the case of Indonesia, in the case of Singapore, led by MAS, Monetary Authority of Singapore, they are already started to prepare for transition credit. Are you familiar with transition credit? So that is related to closure, right? Early closure of coal power plants. And that is going to be some experimentation in Philippines, maybe Indonesia very soon. So that is very new, right? Usually coal power plants operate for 30 years and then maybe close 10 years before, and then they can save they can avoid emissions. So that can be credit. So I think Singapore worked very closely with the Rockefeller Center and a couple of NGO in US and so on. And Bella already prepared this methodology. So pretty soon, I think this called transition credit can be sold and purchased. So because this is really a Singapore initiative, and so I think, it's very important to have a baseline, like a taxonomy, ASEAN taxonomy, baseline. But some country will really take the initiative and move ahead. And then, other country maybe try to catch up. So I think, how to agree, baseline is very important.
Yeah, Dr. Ambiyah?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sayuri. Yeah, I agree that baseline is having baseline that agreed by the ASEAN member state is one of the important thing, because it will depends on the many factors, including the political acceptance on the region. Yeah, and related to the question, like second question probably, whether the ASEAN will have the freedom or room to develop their national standard first, then having harmonized one. Is it correct? Yeah, yeah. I think it's already set by our leaders in the ASEAN under the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework that we will see the existing national standard of each ASEAN member states, while we also try to develop the harmonized one. So the harmonized one will be based on the existing one. And I think it links with the first question. When we look the ASEAN region condition, that we had different state of the carbon pricing and also economic diversity, it has some disadvantage. I mean, not disadvantage, maybe challenge, but it also has advantage. Why I look advantage? Because in addition to the discrepancy or disparity of the market, we also have a forum to monitor among the ASEAN member states. That first internal forum before, like every year we have like annual ministry meeting of the energy. We also have other ministry meeting of different sector as well. And before that's annual, we also have the internal monitoring of the system. That's one, I believe that's a strong one of the ASEAN, because in addition we have each national target, its national condition. We also have the same forum to share, to mention the, like Singapore, what has been done in Singapore, what has been going in the Indonesia. So that will be our advantage to have the harmonized system and also monitoring. Of course, allowing the flexibility is also mentioned in our discussion among the leader. Yeah.
Albertus, please.
Yeah, maybe just an idea before having regional coordination or regional market for carbon credit. Again, this is just an idea. Maybe we can have first some kind of coordination among stock exchange institutions among ASEAN nations, right? It doesn't have to be carbon credit that they trade. Maybe as simple as stock, I don't know, shares of companies, just to get some experience first before we proceed with carbon credit. Yeah, just an idea.
Herlina, also very interested in your views, maybe also specifically on the harmonization aspect. What are your thoughts? Do we start first on the country level with maybe also independent initiative, or do we start with an ASEAN framework?
Yes, I also want to answer on that question that for the harmonization part, that we have ASEAN forum in here. It's one thing that we can share common goals, that we need to reduce emissions. Also, like how, for example, for the carbon pricing, each country have different level of the price. So this kind of forum is also important because we want to make sure that ASEAN regions, we have each nationality have their own economic and climate policy goals. Through this kind of forum, in a way, we can also sharing our experience, and also we need to address that for this to reduce the emitted carbon between ASEAN as regions. For our regulations, we have country priority, but also we have share common goal in the region. So I will also add that. Thank you.
Professor Sayuri, any additional thoughts?
So I just want to talk about carbon credit, including allowances. So I think there are international platforms where investors and a company can buy those credits. So, but to register those carbon credit generated in ASEAN countries on this international platform, I think they need to meet certain criteria. So not all credit generated in Indonesia will be placed on that. So I think still international guideline is important, and of course you will create a domestic guideline for certain sector, but make sure you have a good standard. Yeah. One more issue. There is a CORSIA, C-O-R-S-I-A, CORSIA. It's an international aviation international organization. They set a global international aviation company, airliners, to meet their emission target. There is a growing demand for carbon credit. Now, to be accepted, those carbon credit to be accepted under CORSIA, they have very stringent conditions. Okay, so not all carbon credit generated by ASEAN will be accepted. Maybe a few, one or two. But if those carbon credit will be accepted by CORSIA, then global airliner, want to buy it. So this will create a reputation. So I think you also need to pay attention. I mean, ASEAN standard is important, but to be accepted by such kind of very big customer is very important.
Thank you so much. If there are no more questions in the audience, then I would like to pose one last and final question before ending the session to all four of our speakers, We of course have very heavy European presence also at this forum, with a lot of governments and institutions such like LSE represented here. And something that has come up in the presentation is of course also the role of CBAM and a mechanism that essentially asks exporters, companies as well as exporting countries to price their carbon, which is something that makes a lot of sense from a European point of view in terms of creating fairness and making sure there is fair competition. But from an outside perspective, this is a controversial instrument, and there are lots of concerns in terms of whether also smaller companies are able to comply. So I'm very interested in your views. Is this helpful in terms of also creating a little bit of external pressure to price carbon, or is this not helpful? What is your perspective from an ASEAN regional point of view? Albertus, maybe starting with you and then doing one final round.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess this kind of thing is something that we cannot avoid in this global world. From ASEAN perspective, maybe it will be helpful to have some kind of roadmap where it explains the timeline of the graduation of the tax. I guess it will give some clarity to the exporters in ASEAN when they export something to the EU. Because I guess, again, it's about readiness. So when people can see upfront that, okay, maybe 1 year from now, the tax rate will be like this if they export something that is emission intensive, and then the next 2 years will be like this, or etc. It will give them some kind of time to plan, corporate plan, how to respond with this. So I guess it's okay. Let's have CBAM, but it's just about the how can we roll out this plan, I guess.
Thank you. I will also mention that currently in the global discussions, we're also discussing for all emerging markets about how to build a climate coalitions, aligning carbon pricing, trade, and development. So I see this an opportunity that ASEAN should participate more in these discussions and also coalitions to go together, not only as the ASEAN regions, but also all emerging market, how we respond to the CBAM. Because in a way, for the economic competitiveness, we need to align our carbon pricing, our trade and development, and how we can export between emerging market and also go to the EU or UK. So I see that ASEAN country to not miss out these discussions that happening in the global level. That's really important. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Ambiyah, very interested in your views.
Yeah, it's interesting topic, yeah, CBAM. Yeah, I think for the short term, I think it affect the ASEAN, because if, as we discussed, like not all the ASEAN member states have the same readiness, and this CBAM, as you mentioned, put external additional pressure to us how to react. But I also agree with the speaker, because we have to look on the long term. In the long term, I think the region already on the track, because we all already see the importance of having carbon pricing in the region. And this external pressure actually can be viewed as a good pressure for us, how to prepare the ASEAN region for the long term in line with the global, as also mentioned by Herlina, like to be also actively participate in the global discussion, to have knowledge. And having roadmap or kind of the strategy every year, how to move the readiness level of the ASEAN region in responding to the CBAM and perhaps other global carbon pricing mechanism in the near future. I think that will be helpful, and it also has been being discussed internally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Professor Sayuri?
Yeah. So CBAM is very difficult for the companies in developing countries, but let me explain from Japan's point of view. So Japan also, subject to this CBAM. So they started to report the GHG emission. I think this is based on scope 1 on emission. So they're already doing it. and then this applies to big company. Now, big company have to do it, so they ask their suppliers, the Japanese supplier and the supplier in ASEAN, to report it. So it's very tough, but it generates kind of international, collaboration in terms of GHG emission reporting, and it will ultimately lead to the greater effort to reduce GHG emissions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, very interesting views, and of course, open to continuing discussion over coffee during the break. Thank you so much for having attended this joint CPI LSE session. Very much appreciated that you came over and joined us here on a Friday morning after a very busy week. Please join me in thanking our speakers and panelists, and thank you so much again for attending.